Your prehistoric garbage is worthless, she spat in my face right before bulldozing priceless 40-million-year-old fossils for her luxury condos. Yesterday, I was a broke scientist being crushed by powerful millionaires. Today, I'm signing ownership papers for their entire development. Blood still boils in my veins when I remember how that HOA president stood on my excavation site in her $1,000 heels, crushing a fossil under her foot while smirking. Science is cute, Dr. Foster, but money always wins. She had no idea what was buried in those documents I would soon uncover. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment telling me if powerful interests ever tried to steamroll over you. No one expected a paleontologist to end up owning an entire luxury complex. But that's exactly what happened. The morning everything changed started like any other. The California sun was beating down on my excavation site, and I was carefully brushing dirt from what looked like the jawbone of an Eocene mammal. This wasn't just any find, it was potentially a new species. My grandfather had left me this 5-acre plot outside Pinehurst with stories of strange bones he'd found while digging fence posts. As a paleontologist with a PhD from Stanford, but limited funding, this personal dig site was my secret treasure trove. I'd been working it slowly for years, documenting everything meticulously, knowing one day I might find something truly extraordinary. That morning, I thought I finally had. I was so engrossed in my work that I didn't hear the cars pull up. The sound of doors slamming finally broke my concentration. Looking up, I saw 3 luxury SUVs and a group of well-dressed people marching toward me. Leading them was a tall woman in her mid-40s, designer sunglasses perched on her nose, and an expression of determined authority that immediately set me on edge. Something about her seemed vaguely familiar, though I couldn't place her. Behind her trailed architects with rolled-up plans and a photographer documenting the site. Dr. Ethan Foster. I'm Margot Blackwell, president of the Pinehurst Estates Homeowners Association, she announced, extending a manicured hand that I reluctantly shook after wiping my dusty palm on my jeans. I'm here to inform you that the HOA has purchased the surrounding land, and we're breaking ground on a 100-unit luxury condominium development in 2 weeks. Our plans have been approved by the City Council. She gestured broadly, encompassing not just the land around mine, but worryingly parts of what I believed was my property. We wanted to give you a courtesy heads up since you'll have construction equipment as neighbors soon. My stomach dropped. Wait, there must be some mistake. This is protected land. At least my 5 acres are. And I've just found what could be an important fossil specimen. I pointed to my careful excavation. This entire area might be a significant Eocene fossil bed. We'd need to conduct a proper survey before any construction. Margot's polite smile didn't reach her eyes. She glanced at my dig site with barely concealed disdain. Dinosaur bones are fascinating for children, Dr. Foster, but this development represents a $300 million investment and will bring significant tax revenue to Pinehurst. Progress can't stop for a few old rocks. Her tone was dismissive, as if I were a child with a hobby rather than a credentialed scientist. Bees aren't dinosaurs, I corrected, feeling my face flush with frustration. They're Eocene mammals from roughly 40 million years ago. And they're scientifically valuable. I needed to see exactly where my property line was drawn because this land had been in my family for 60 years. One of the architects stepped forward with a map pointing to boundaries that looked suspiciously different from what I remembered. According to their plans, they owned land that encroached on what I believed was mine. When I protested, Margot's friendly demeanor cooled noticeably. We have excellent relationships with the City Council, Dr. Foster. I'd advise against creating problems where none need to exist. The property lines were properly surveyed and recorded. Before leaving, she leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to ensure only I could hear. Your father was William Foster, wasn't he? The famous geology professor. I believe we've crossed paths before. There was something in her tone that made my skin crawl, a personal edge to what should have been a straightforward property dispute. After they left, I called my friend Michael Barnes, an environmental attorney. We'd been friends since college, and while he usually handled bigger cases for his firm, he'd always had a soft spot for lost causes, which was exactly what this felt like. "Meet me at my office in an hour," he said after listening to my frantic explanation. "And bring every document you have about that land." "Every single one, Ethan." In Michael's cluttered office, we spread out all my grandfather's original deeds and property maps from the 1960s. After comparing them with the current county records, Michael looked up with a frown. "These don't match. According to these original documents, your property is nearly an acre larger than what's currently recorded. Someone altered the property lines in the county system." He pointed to discrepancies in the boundaries that correlated exactly with where I'd been finding the richest fossil deposits and precisely where the HOA planned to build. "How is that possible?" I asked, stunned. "Don't they verify these changes?" Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "They're supposed to, but with understaffed county offices and the right connections, look, we need to take this to the city council immediately. File a formal objection to the development based on both the property dispute and the potential scientific significance." As we left his office, a strange feeling of determination replaced my initial shock. This land wasn't just dirt and rocks to me. It was my grandfather's legacy and potentially a significant scientific discovery. I wouldn't let it be bulldozed for luxury condos without a fight. The next morning, I waited outside the Pinehurst City Hall, rehearsing what I'd say at the council meeting that afternoon. As I paced nervously, a town car pulled up and Margot Blackwell stepped out. She met a woman I recognized as Councilwoman Patricia Wilson at the entrance. They exchanged what looked like an overly familiar handshake, and Wilson nodded reassuringly at whatever Margot was saying. When they spotted me, their conversation abruptly ended, and Wilson gave me a plastic politician's smile, while Margot merely raised an eyebrow, as if amused by my presence. Watching them disappear into the building, I gripped my folder of documents tighter. I knew this land was rightfully mine, but I was beginning to wonder if that would be enough when my opponent seemed to have the entire system in her pocket. The city council chamber was packed that afternoon, mostly with people wearing Progress for Pinehurst buttons, clearly Margot supporters. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, acutely aware of being outnumbered. When my turn came to speak, I approached the podium with my folder of evidence, explaining the property line discrepancy and the potential scientific importance of the fossil site. "Before any construction begins, we need a proper archaeological and paleontological survey," I concluded. This site could contain invaluable information about mammalian evolution during the Eocene period. Once it's destroyed, that knowledge is lost forever. Councilwoman Wilson barely looked up from her phone as I spoke. When I finished, she smiled thinly and said, "Thank you for your concerns, Dr. Foster, but this development has already gone through all proper channels for approval. The HOA has provided documentation showing the property boundaries which match our current records." She didn't acknowledge the original deeds I'd presented or the possibility that current records might be incorrect. "The council has voted unanimously to approve this project, which will bring needed economic growth to our community." I tried to protest, but my microphone was cut off and the next speaker was called. The message was clear. The decision had been made long before I walked into the room. As I returned to my seat, Margot caught my eye and gave me a small, victorious smile. The chamber erupted in applause as the next speaker, a representative from the Chamber of Commerce, extolled the economic benefits of the Pinehurst Estates development. I sat there feeling a tightness in my chest as I watched democracy in action, or rather, the perversion of it. Several other community members spoke, some expressing environmental concerns, but they were quickly dismissed with vague assurances about thorough impact studies that I strongly suspected didn't exist or were severely compromised. The meeting had all the trappings of due process, but the outcome had clearly been predetermined. After the meeting, I approached several council members individually, hoping to make a more personal appeal. Most avoided eye contact or made excuses about having other appointments. One elderly councilman, however, paused long enough to whisper, "I'm sorry, son. This deal was locked in months ago. There are forces at work here bigger than fossils." Before I could press him for details, he hurried away, looking nervously over his shoulder, as if afraid of being seen speaking with me. His cryptic warning only deepened my suspicion that something beyond routine development was driving this project. Outside the chamber, a small group of environmental activists had gathered, holding handmade signs protesting the development's potential impact on local wildlife. I introduced myself, finding unexpected allies in their leader, a retired environmental science teacher named Eleanor. "We've been fighting these developers for years," she explained. "They always win because they've got the money and the connections, but we don't give up." Eleanor offered to connect me with local conservation groups who might support my cause, providing a glimmer of hope that I wasn't completely alone in this fight. The next day, I contacted Dr. Rebecca Taylor, a professor of paleontology at the local university. Unlike some of my more theoretical colleagues, Rebecca specialized in field research and had considerable experience with fossil sites in California. After showing her my initial finds and the site itself, she was visibly excited. "Ethan, this is remarkable. These specimens suggest an unprecedented diversity of mammalian life in this region during the Eocene. The scientific community needs to know about this." She agreed to prepare an official assessment of the site's significance, which might carry more weight with officials than my lone voice. While Rebecca worked on her report, Margot launched a PR campaign painting me as an obstructionist standing in the way of Pinerests' economic development. Local papers ran quotes from her describing me as an academic elitist, more concerned with old bones than new jobs. Potential condo buyers and investors rallied behind her, while a smaller contingent of academics and environmentalists supported my position. The town was becoming increasingly divided over what the media had dubbed the fossil fight. It was startling how quickly public opinion could be shaped. Slick brochures appeared around town showcasing rendered images of the proposed development, beautiful buildings with rooftop gardens, community spaces, and promises of hundreds of new jobs. What these glossy materials conveniently omitted was any mention of the scientific value being destroyed or the suspicious circumstances surrounding the property boundaries. A local radio host devoted an entire segment to ridiculing fossil fanatics who were holding up progress, complete with dinosaur roaring sound effects. I declined an invitation to appear on the show, knowing it was designed to be a trap rather than a fair discussion. Meanwhile, Michael had been digging into Margot's background. "I found something interesting," he told me over coffee one morning. 20 years ago, your father served on a scientific review board that rejected Margot Blackwell's research in molecular biology. The criticism was pretty harsh, essentially called her methodology fundamentally flawed. Her academic career tanked after that. She switched to real estate law and eventually development. He looked at me meaningfully. "This isn't just business for her, Ethan. It's personal." The revelation hit me like a thunderbolt. Suddenly, Margot's comment about knowing my father made perfect sense. This wasn't simply about valuable real estate. It was about revenge against the Foster family. My father had always been a stickler for proper scientific methodology, unwilling to let flawed research pass peer review, regardless of the consequences. He'd never mentioned Margot specifically, but he had often spoken about the responsibility scientists had to maintain rigorous standards. "Bad science hurts everyone," he would say. "Sometimes being tough is the kindest thing you can do in the long run." I wondered if he had any idea of the grudge his professional integrity had spawned. That night, I was awakened by my phone security alert. The motion-activated cameras I'd installed at the dig site had detected movement. Throwing on clothes, I raced to my car and drove to the property, heart pounding. By the time I arrived, the damage was done. My carefully marked excavation pits had been filled in, tools scattered, and most devastatingly, several partially excavated fossil specimens had been smashed. Through the mud, I could make out footprints and the tread marks of boots bearing the logo of Wright Construction, the company contracted to build Margot's condos. I fell to my knees beside the destruction, carefully picking up fragments of what had been a nearly intact jawbone. As I gathered the pieces, a sharp edge cut my palm, blood mixing with the dirt. The pain barely registered through my shock, which was rapidly transforming into fury. I stood up suddenly, my cut hand dripping, staring at the destruction with a newfound determination. This wasn't just about property lines anymore. The security footage was grainy but clear enough to show two men wearing right construction jackets, methodically destroying my work. The next morning, Michael and I drove to their company headquarters. The receptionist's eyes widened when she saw my bandaged hand and determined expression. Thomas Wright, the company's owner and chief engineer, reluctantly agreed to see us after Michael mentioned the footage. He was a nervous man in his 50s with the weathered face of someone who'd spent years on construction sites before moving into management. "I don't know anything about vandalism," he insisted, not quite meeting my eyes. "My crews know better than to trespass." I placed my phone on his desk, playing the security footage. "These are your jackets. Your company logo," I said quietly. "The timestamp is 2 a.m. this morning." Wright's face paled. "I'll need to look into this internally. Perhaps some employees acted independently. Or perhaps they were following orders," Michael suggested, "orders from someone who stands to lose a lot if Dr. Foster's fossil site is officially recognized." As we left, Michael shared another discovery. Wright Construction was nearly bankrupt 3 years ago. Then they suddenly landed a series of exclusive contracts with developments tied to Margot Blackwell, no competitive bidding, just direct awards worth millions. "That's not just suspicious," he said. "It might be illegal." We spent the afternoon at a law firm specializing in property disputes, drafting a formal complaint. By the time we finished, it was dark. Walking to the parking garage, I immediately noticed something was wrong. My car's windshield had been smashed, glass sparkling under the fluorescent lights. A note had been tucked under one of the wipers. "Worry about your scientific career instead." My hands trembled as I picked up a piece of broken glass, rage and fear mixing uncomfortably in my stomach. Looking at Michael's grim expression, I knew we were dealing with someone who wouldn't hesitate to escalate further. Our lawsuit landed on the desk of Judge Howard Simmons, a man with deep ties to Pinerist's old guard. I should have been suspicious when the case was assigned so quickly, but at the time I was just relieved to get a hearing date. That relief evaporated as soon as Simmons began speaking. He barely glanced at our evidence of property line tampering or the destroyed fossils, repeatedly cutting Michael off mid-argument. After just 20 minutes, he dismissed our case for insufficient evidence and lifted the temporary work stoppage we'd requested. "This court sees no compelling reason to delay a properly approved development project," he concluded, banging his gavel with finality. Outside the courtroom, I leaned against a marble column, feeling utterly defeated. "He didn't even look at the original deeds," I said, "or Rebecca's scientific assessment." Michael looked equally frustrated. "I found out this morning that Simmons and Councilwoman Wilson served together on 3 charity boards. They're golf buddies. This whole system is rigged, Ethan." He sighed heavily. "We can appeal, but that could take months, and by then, they'll have already broken ground." For a moment, I considered giving up. What was the point of fighting when Margot seemed to have every advantage? I'd already spent thousands of dollars I didn't have on legal fees, lost my adjunct teaching position due to excessive absences while dealing with the case, and invested countless hours. Maybe I should cut my losses, take whatever settlement they might offer, and move on. That afternoon, Rebecca called with troubling news. "I've been reviewing the HOA's financial statements, their public record since they issued construction bonds. Something doesn't add up." She explained that a mysterious offshore investor group called the Artemis Group had been continuously funneling money into the project despite numerous red flags in the permitting process. "I'm not a financial expert, but this looks suspiciously like money laundering. They're moving millions through this development regardless of whether it makes business sense." This revelation gave me a new angle to investigate. If the development wasn't just about condos, but about cleaning dirty money, that would explain Margot's ruthless determination to proceed regardless of the consequences. I decided to document everything happening at the site, creating video updates about the scientific importance of the fossils and the suspicious activities surrounding the development. My first video explaining the situation quickly gained traction online, resonating with people who had experienced similar battles with powerful development interests. Margot's response was swift and devastating. She appeared at the university department where I held my part-time teaching position, requesting a meeting with the department chair. I wasn't privy to their conversation, but that evening I received an email informing me that my position was being reconsidered due to concerns about extracurricular activities creating conflicts of interest for the university. Reading between the lines, it was clear. Stop making noise about the development, or lose your academic association entirely. I confronted my department chair the next day, a man I'd respected and worked with for years. He couldn't meet my eyes as he explained that several major university donors, who happened to be investors in Pinehurst estates, had expressed concerns about my activism. Rebecca faced similar pressure, with research funding mysteriously delayed and speaking engagements canceled. Standing outside my now empty lab, holding a box containing broken fossil fragments and personal belongings, I felt a profound emptiness. Everything I'd worked for, my reputation, my teaching position, my research, was crumbling around me because I'd had the audacity to stand up to Margot Blackwell. I looked back at the campus, then turned toward the distant hills where my land lay, where bulldozers would soon destroy 40 million years of natural history. If I don't stand up for this, there won't be anything left to excavate anymore, I whispered to myself. A new resolve hardened within me. That evening, I received an unexpected text from a blocked number. Need to talk about the development. Not safe on phone. The message included an address for a diner outside town. Suspicious but intrigued, I decided to go, asking Michael to wait nearby as backup. At the designated booth sat Thomas Wright, nervously fidgeting with a coffee cup. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I never signed up for this, he began without preamble. Construction, sure, even cutting a few corners on permits, but not destroying scientific research or threatening people. He glanced around before sliding a USB drive across the table. Margot falsified the property line documents. I have the original surveys and the altered ones she submitted. I also have emails where she explicitly instructed me to take care of the excavation problem. And something else you should know, he continued. I once saw an investment payment that didn't go through any bank. They called it Margot's private fund, cash in briefcases, Dr. Foster. Millions of dollars. I stared at him, hardly believing what I was hearing. Why are you telling me this now? Because she's gone too far. And because my daughter studies paleontology at Berkeley, when she found out what happened to your site, the way she looked at me. His voice cracked. I can't look in the mirror anymore. I took the drive, promising to protect his identity. As I left, Wright grabbed my arm. Be careful. Margot has people everywhere, and she hates your family with a passion I've never seen. She says your father destroyed her life's work and now she's returning the favor. Back at my apartment, I sat alone in the darkness, staring at my grandfather's photograph and the box of broken fossils. I could almost hear his voice from my childhood. Heritage isn't something you bury, Ethan. It's something you protect. I hadn't understood then what he meant. Now I did. Michael arrived with takeout and determination, and we began planning our next move. Meanwhile, across town, Margot was calling an emergency meeting with her legal team, increasingly paranoid about traitors in our midst. The files Thomas provided were damning. Detailed email exchanges showing Margot had known about the correct property boundaries all along. Internal memos discussing the fossil problem and how to circumvent environmental regulations. And most shockingly, evidence that she had personally directed the destruction of my excavation site. Michael and I carefully cataloged everything, creating backup copies stored in multiple secure locations. This is exactly what we've been waiting for, he said. eyes gleaming. This is the kind of proof that can't be ignored. But we both knew exposing the truth would come at a cost. And Margot Blackwell wasn't going to go down without a fight. The files Thomas provided were damning, detailed email exchanges showing Margot had known about the correct property boundaries all along. Internal memos discussing the fossil problem and how to circumvent environmental regulations. And most shockingly, evidence that she had personally directed the destruction of my excavation site. Michael and I carefully cataloged everything, creating backup copies stored in multiple secure locations. "This is exactly what we needed," Michael said, eyes gleaming as he reviewed the evidence. "With this, we could potentially file criminal charges, not just a civil suit." Meanwhile, my video updates about the controversy had gone viral, with the latest reaching over 1 million views. Local news stations picked up the story, interviewing both supporters and opponents of the development. The scientific community rallied around me, with several prominent paleontologists signing an open letter condemning the destruction of potentially significant fossil discoveries. The tide of public opinion was starting to shift, putting pressure on city officials who had previously been firmly in Margot's corner. Despite the growing opposition, construction equipment began arriving at the site. Early one morning, I received a frantic call from a neighbor whose property overlooked my land. "They're starting to dig, Ethan, right now." Grabbing my camera, I raced to the site and found bulldozers already breaking ground directly on the disputed boundary line. Without thinking, I positioned myself in front of the nearest machine, refusing to move despite the operator's warnings. "This land is stolen," I shouted, filming everything on my phone. "These property lines are falsified, and there's a pending investigation." A small crowd of onlookers gathered, some filming on their phones as the construction foreman radioed for instructions. I could see uncertainty in his eyes, creating a viral moment where forcibly removing a protester wasn't in anyone's playbook. Eventually, police arrived, responding to calls from the construction company. Despite my protests and attempts to show them the original property documents, they handcuffed me and led me away for trespassing on my own land. The cruel irony wasn't lost on the growing crowd of spectators, many of whom shouted support as I was placed in the police cruiser. From the window, I spotted Margot watching from her luxury SUV, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. Michael bailed me out within hours, already turning my arrest into a public relations opportunity. By that evening, my detention was featured on regional news with side-by-side images of the handcuffs and the fossils that had been destroyed. Scientists from across the country were calling into news programs, explaining the potential significance of the Eocene find. Margot had won the battle, but was rapidly losing the war of public opinion. In response to the growing controversy, a group of Pinehurst residents organized a community meeting at the town library. I attended, expecting hostility, in what had previously been Margot's stronghold. Instead, I found a divided room with many expressing concerns about the development's impact. One mother stood up, her young son clutching a dinosaur toy beside her. "If our children can't see these remnants of the past, do we deserve to live in these beautiful buildings? What are we teaching them about what we value?" Her question hung in the air, shifting the conversation from economics to ethics in a way that resonated deeply with many present. 2 days later, Margot called a press conference on the steps of City Hall. Flanked by her attorneys and several city council members, though notably not all of them, she launched an aggressive counterattack. "Dr. Foster is a scientific extremist," she declared, "who believes his academic interests should override the property rights of others and the economic future of our community." She claimed his wild allegations about the property boundaries had been repeatedly rejected by county officials and the courts. "It's time to move forward with this vital project." Her legal team announced they were considering a defamation lawsuit against me for false claims damaging to investment prospects. What Margot didn't know was that Rebecca had been digging deeper into her past. That evening, Rebecca called with a breakthrough. "I found records of a scientific conference from 20 years ago," she explained excitedly. Your father, William Foster, was the head of a review committee that rejected Margot Blackwell's research. The critique was devastating, called her methodology fundamentally flawed, and her conclusions unsupported by evidence. According to academic records, she abandoned her scientific career immediately afterward. So this is revenge, I said. The pieces finally clicking into place. She's destroying my career and my land to get back at my father. It gets worse, Rebecca continued. The research she was trying to publish would have secured a major biotech patent worth potentially billions. When it was discredited, she lost everything. In her mind, the Foster family destroyed her life's work and future fortune. Michael received an anonymous email that same day containing financial records showing the HOA had secretly purchased land from a retiring city council member at suspiciously below market rates, with promises of a luxury unit in the new development. It was textbook corruption, providing yet another avenue for investigation. The web of misconduct surrounding Pinehurst Estates was growing more complex by the day. As these revelations accumulated, residents began openly questioning the HOA's transparency. Several potential condo buyers backed out, citing concerns about the controversy. The project that had seemed unstoppable was beginning to show cracks. Watching the news coverage that evening, I allowed myself a small smile. I don't have anything left to lose, I told Michael as we prepared our next legal move. But they have an entire empire to protect. Armed with mounting evidence, Michael and I implemented our boldest move yet. Late one night, using the building access code Thomas had provided, we entered the HOA office to search for the original property documents we believed were being hidden there. The risk was enormous. If caught, we could face criminal charges, but the potential reward was greater. After 30 tense minutes of searching through filing cabinets, we found what we were looking for, the original survey maps showing my property boundaries exactly as my grandfather's deeds indicated, with handwritten notes from Margot directing how to alter them in the county system. "This is it," Michael whispered, carefully photographing everything. The smoking gun. As we were leaving, a security guard nearly caught us, forcing us to hide in a storage closet for over an hour before making our escape. The adrenaline rush was terrifying, but exhilarating. For the first time, I felt like we were taking control of the situation rather than merely reacting to Margot's moves. The next day, Thomas Wright was called into Margot's office. Someone had noticed him accessing sensitive files, and she suspected betrayal. "If you've shared anything with Foster, I'll ensure you never work in construction again," she threatened, according to what Thomas later told me. "I have friends in every major firm from here to Seattle." Thomas maintained his innocence, but Margot's suspicion had been aroused. She placed him under what amounted to surveillance, having team members monitor his communications and movements. Using our growing evidence file, I secured a meeting with Councilwoman Patricia Wilson. Rather than being confrontational, I simply laid out what we discovered about her colleague's below-market land sale to the HOA and the apparent conflicts of interest throughout the approval process. "This will all come out in discovery during our next lawsuit," I explained calmly. "I'm giving you an opportunity to be on the right side of this before it explodes publicly." Wilson's political instincts for self-preservation kicked in immediately. "I may have been insufficiently diligent in reviewing this project," she conceded carefully. "Perhaps a re-examination of the approval process would be appropriate." It wasn't a complete victory, but having even one council member break ranks with Margot represented a significant shift in the power dynamics. Worried about losing momentum on her project, Margot pushed her construction teams to work around the clock, hoping to create a situation where so much work had been completed that stopping would be deemed impractical. Michael countered by approaching the California Heritage Commission, presenting Rebecca's scientific findings. After reviewing the evidence, they issued a temporary construction halt order to evaluate the fossil bed's importance, a significant victory that bought us precious time. Margot's response was to ignore the order entirely, instructing her crews to continue working. Heritage Commission orders are advisory until enforced by a court, her legal team claimed. Though this interpretation was dubious at best, when state officials arrived to post cease and desist notices, they found construction continuing unabated, setting the stage for potential criminal contempt charges. As the conflict escalated, so did Margot's personal vendetta against me. She hired private investigators to follow me constantly, photographing my movements and intimidating anyone who met with me. One evening, I returned home to find my apartment had been broken into. My computer was gone, along with all my research notes and the fossil fragments I'd salvaged. The police took a report but seemed uninterested in investigating thoroughly, suggesting it was probably just a random burglary, despite the selective nature of what was taken. Thomas Wright paid a heavy price for his cooperation. Margot fired him on a trumped-up pretext and then began calling his industry contacts, blacklisting him from other jobs. Fortunately, he'd anticipated this and had backed up all relevant documents before his termination. I knew what I was risking, he told me when we met in secret. But my daughter looks at me with respect again, and that's worth more than any job. Our breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a junior member of the HOA board, increasingly uncomfortable with the legal and ethical issues surrounding the project, reached out through Michael. During a clandestine meeting in a parking garage that felt more like a spy movie than real life, she revealed that Margot had been falsifying board meeting minutes and forging signatures on approval documents. Most of the board has no idea what's really happening, she explained. We're told everything is routine, and documents are passed around for signatures with sticky notes marking where to sign. Nobody reads the fine print. Meanwhile, Michael uncovered serious environmental compliance issues in the project approval process. Required impact studies had been skipped entirely or conducted by firms with clear conflicts of interest. The EPA would have grounds to intervene if presented with the evidence. Our strategy was shifting from merely defending my property to a multi-pronged attack on the entire development's legitimacy. Sometimes to beat someone who plays by no rules, you need to make a move beyond their imagination, I told Michael as we finalized our strategy. The transformation in me was complete. From the cautious academic who had initially just wanted to protect his excavation to a determined fighter ready to bring down Margot's entire operation. When I caught my reflection in a window, I barely recognized myself. Standing straighter, eyes hardened with resolve, the tentative smile replaced by a determined set of the jaw. I was no longer the man Margot had initially intimidated. With our comprehensive evidence file, including the original property documents, Thomas's whistleblower testimony, the falsified HOA board records, and the environmental compliance violations, Michael and I filed a new, much broader lawsuit. This time, we bypassed the local court where Margot held sway, filing instead in federal court under statutes covering land fraud, environmental protection, and racketeering. The detailed complaint ran to over 100 pages and named not just Margot and the HOA, but also several city officials as defendants. A federal judge, after reviewing our evidence, issued an immediate injunction halting all construction pending investigation.